The sun had barely risen when I saw the flashing blue lights reflecting off our lake. My son, standing there with his fishing rod, looked more confused than scared as the officer stepped out of his car. I knew right then that this had HOA Karen written all over it. What she didn't know was that my boy wasn't just fishing, he was the new wildlife warden chief for this entire county. And today, she was about to regret making that call. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. I was sipping my morning coffee on the porch when I saw a squad car slowly rolling down our gravel driveway. The flashing lights looked out of place in the quiet dawn, bouncing off the water of our lake like shards of glass. My son, Luke, was standing knee-deep by the shoreline with his fishing rod, looking confused. He had just come back from college a week ago, taking over as the wildlife warden chief for the entire county, a position he had worked hard to earn. He wasn't just fishing for fun, he was checking on the lake's trout population, something he now had the authority to oversee. But of course, HOA Karen didn't know that. Karen was already there, arms crossed, standing near the officer like she owned the place. She was wearing that ridiculous wide-brimmed sun hat, and her lips were painted in that sharp red color that always looked like she was ready to scold someone. "Officer," she barked, "I told you, that boy is trespassing. I want him fined, and I want that fishing pole confiscated. This is private property under our HOA's rules." I felt my blood pressure rise. This was our lake. My great-grandfather dug out the dam that made this pond more than 100 years ago. The land wasn't just ours by law, it was part of our family's history. Karen had been living here for less than 5 years, yet she strutted around like she was queen of the neighborhood. I walked down the path slowly, setting my coffee cup on a fence post. "Morning, officer," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is there a problem here?" The officer, a young man with a stiff posture, looked a little unsure. "Sir, this woman called in a report of trespassing and illegal fishing. She says the boy doesn't belong here." I turned to my son, who was standing quietly with his rod in hand. "Luke, tell him who you are." Luke stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I'm Luke Harper, Wildlife Warden Chief for Carson Valley County. This lake is under my jurisdiction, and I'm conducting a fish population survey this morning. Sir, I have my credentials in my truck if you'd like to see them." The officer's eyebrows shot up. "Wildlife Warden Chief, as in, you're law enforcement." Luke nodded. "State certified. I'm here on official duty, but also this is our family property. There's no trespassing happening here." Karen's face went pale for a second, but she quickly recovered. "Don't listen to him. He's just making that up. Nobody that young is a warden chief. Look at him, he's barely out of high school." She spun toward me. "And you, I've told you before, this lake belongs to the HOA. It's in our handbook." I couldn't help but laugh. "Karen, you can wave your handbook all you want, but it doesn't override county records or deeds. This lake was here long before your HOA even existed. And my son isn't just some kid with a fishing pole. He has more authority over this water than you'll ever have." The officer held up his hand. "Ma'am, if what he says is true, then you may be making a false report. That's not something I can ignore." Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She stared at Luke, her jaw tightening, realizing that the situation wasn't going the way she expected. Luke turned and looked out over the lake, the early sun glinting off the ripples. "Dad," he said quietly, "it's starting again. She's trying to push us off what's ours." I stepped closer to the officer, lowering my voice. "This woman has been harassing us for months. She wants to control this lake because her house backs up to it, but it's never been HOA property. We've got the original deed. My family built that dam back in 1874. I can get you the papers if you'd like." The officer nodded. "That would help clear things up. From the look of things, I may need to file a report about this incident." Karen looked horrified. "A report about me? He's the one fishing illegally." "No," I said firmly. "He's the one enforcing the law. You just made a big mistake. Karen," she huffed, spinning on her heels, muttering something about calling the board and taking this to the HOA president. But I knew this was just the beginning. Karen wouldn't let it go. Not her. She would be back. And next time, She'd come with backup. As the officer left, Luke reeled in his line and looked at me. "We're going to have to deal with her sooner or later," he said. I sighed, glancing toward Karen's house. "Oh, we'll deal with her. But not on her terms. We've got the law on our side, and more than that, we've got the truth. Let her call whoever she wants. She's about to find out that messing with this family is a battle she can't win." After the officer left and Karen stormed back toward her house, I stood for a moment by the lake, letting the cool breeze settle my nerves. The water reflected the sky like a mirror, calm and steady, just like it had been for generations. This land wasn't just some property on a map. It was a legacy built, protected, and passed down through blood, sweat, and stubborn will. "Dad," Luke said, leaning his fishing rod against the old dock, "I don't understand why she thinks she owns this place. I mean, we've been here since forever." I gave a small laugh, though there was no humor in it, because people like Karen don't care about history. They see a map with HOA boundaries and think that's all that matters. But this land, this lake, it was here long before any of that nonsense. I motioned for Luke to follow me as we walked up the path to the old barn where I kept some of the family documents in a locked trunk. On the way, I told him the story I'd heard since I was a boy. Your great-grandfather, Samuel Harper, settled this valley in 1874. He came here with nothing but a wagon, a mule, and a dream to build something his family could hold on to. Back then, this was just open land, wild and unforgiving. But Samuel saw something no one else did. He found a natural spring up the hill and decided to build a dam to create this lake, so he could water crops and cattle year-round. Folks called him crazy at first, but when the drought hit a few years later, every rancher around came begging for a bucket of water. Luke smiled. "Sounds like something you'd do." I chuckled. Guess the stubborn streak runs deep in this family. Anyway, Samuel worked the land until his hands bled, planting cottonwoods along the water's edge and building that dock you are standing on today. He even carved our family initials into the first oak beam of the barn. That's how much this place meant to him. We reached the barn, the old wooden doors creaking as I pushed them open. The smell of hay and sun-warmed wood filled the air. I walked to the far corner where an iron trunk sat, its black paint chipped and faded. I knelt down, unlocked it, and pulled out a bundle of documents tied with twine. "These," I said, unwrapping the yellowed papers, "are the original land deeds, signed, sealed, and recorded in Carson Valley before your great-grandfather even finished building his cabin. This lake isn't just ours because we say so. It's ours because the law says so, and no HOA handbook can change that." Luke picked up one of the deeds, running his fingers over the faded ink. "So, Karen's just bluffing." "Exactly. But bluffing's dangerous when you scream loud enough to make people believe you. That's how folks like her get away with things. We can't let her rewrite the truth." We sat there for a while, flipping through old maps and letters. One of the papers was a hand-drawn map showing the valley in 1880 with the lake marked as Harper Pond. Another was a letter Samuel wrote to his brother about the first trout he stocked here, caught from a nearby creek with nothing but a piece of twine and a bent nail. "You know," I said quietly, "this place isn't just a home. It's a promise. Every Harper before us fought to keep it safe. That's why I built this cabin, and that's why you're here now, taking over as wildlife warden. It's not just a job, Luke, it's who we are." Luke nodded, his expression hardening. "Then I won't let her ruin it. She can call the cops, the HOA, or whoever she wants. I'll stand my ground, just like Great-Grandpa did." I smiled, proud of the determination in his voice. Good, because Karen's not done yet. People like her never quit when they think they're right. She'll come back, and next time, she'll try harder. But we'll be ready. As we left the barn, I glanced back at the lake, its surface glittering in the morning sun. The cottonwoods Samuel planted still stood tall along the shore, their roots deep and strong. They'd weathered storms, floods, and even fire over the years, just like our family. When we got back to the porch, I could already see Karen pacing in her yard, phone pressed to her ear, No doubt. She was calling the HOA president, or maybe plotting her next stunt. I sipped my coffee, feeling that old stubborn fire rise in me again. She has no idea what she's up against, I muttered. Luke smirked. Let her find out the hard way. The following morning, I wasn't surprised to see another car creeping down the road toward our property. This time, it wasn't a squad car, but a black SUV with the HOA logo on its door. Karen was in the passenger seat, her sunglasses perched high on her nose like a badge of authority. Beside her sat Mr. Dalton, the HOA president, a balding man with a permanent frown who always acted like the entire valley was his personal kingdom. Luke had already gone down to the dock to check the water quality, his tackle box resting near his feet. When he saw them coming, he leaned his fishing rod against the railing and crossed his arms. Here we go again, he muttered. I stepped down the porch stairs as the SUV pulled up, its tires crunching on the gravel. Dalton got out first, adjusting his belt and squaring his shoulders like he was about to deliver a courtroom lecture. Karen followed, her heels sinking slightly into the dirt, but her face was all smugness and spite. Morning, I said, trying to keep my tone even. What's the issue today? Dalton cleared his throat. Mr. Harper, we've received multiple complaints from HOA members about unauthorized fishing and water use on this lake. According to our guidelines, all residents must have HOA-issued permits to fish, boat, or make alterations to shared water resources. I raised an eyebrow. Shared water resources? This lake isn't shared. It's on our private land. Your guidelines don't apply here. Karen jumped in, her voice sharp as a whip. That's where you're wrong. This lake is visible from HOA property, which makes it part of our community aesthetics. We have every right to enforce rules about how it's used. Luke laughed, a quiet, humorless laugh. Community aesthetics. You're saying my fishing pole is ruining the view. Karen's eyes narrowed. Don't get smart with me, young man. You're breaking the rules, and the HOA won't tolerate it. Luke took a slow step forward, his calm demeanor cutting sharper than any raised voice. I'm not breaking anything, ma'am. I'm doing my job. As Wildlife Warden Chief, I'm responsible for monitoring the fish population in this valley, including this lake. If you think you can overrule county law with your HOA handbook, you're in for a rude awakening. Dalton's jaw tightened. Wildlife Warden or not, you still need to respect community regulations. We can issue fines, restrict access. I cut him off. No, you can't. I've got every deed and legal paper to prove this lake is ours. It's not under your jurisdiction. You try to find my son or restrict our access, and you'll be the one facing legal trouble. Dalton blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. Karen, however, stepped forward with her phone raised like a weapon. You're going to regret this. I've already contacted our lawyer. We'll see how smug you are when you're paying penalties for non-compliance. Luke didn't flinch. Ma'am, if you call a lawyer, make sure they understand one thing. This lake is under state wildlife oversight. That means I have the authority to enforce environmental regulations here. I could just as easily cite you for interfering with an official survey. Dalton looked at Luke, then at me, his face paling slightly. He muttered something about checking the records and turned to leave. Karen, however, stayed rooted in place, glaring at us like she could burn a hole through the air. This isn't over, she spat. I'll call the sheriff if I have to. You do that, I said with a small smile. The sheriff's my cousin. He knows exactly who owns this land. Karen froze, her face twisting into a mix of disbelief and fury. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stomped back to the SUV. Dalton gave me a stiff nod before driving off, the tires kicking up dust behind them. Luke let out a breath he'd been holding. She's not going to stop, Dad. No, I admitted, watching the SUV disappear down the road, but every time she pushes, she shows just how little power she really has. And next time, we'll be ready with more than just words. We spent the rest of the morning at the dock, going over Luke's survey notes. He pointed out areas where the fish population had grown since the last report. It was clear he took his job seriously, and I couldn't have been prouder. Still, as the sun rose higher, I caught myself glancing toward Karen's house. I knew she'd be on the phone again, spinning her version of the story, trying to rally the HOA against us. That woman thrived on control, and the thought of us standing our ground must have been eating her alive. Next time, Luke said, packing up his tackle box. She'll probably come with backup. Maybe even a lawyer. I nodded. Then we'll show them the real power of a Harper. Not just the law, but the truth. This land is ours, and no one's taking it from us. By midweek, the tension in our quiet valley was thicker than summer heat. Karen wasn't the type to lick her wounds quietly. From the moment she and Dalton drove off, I knew she was scheming. And, sure enough, the next day, I spotted a handful of HOA board members marching up and down the edge of our property like they were on a mission. Luke and I watched from the porch, sipping coffee. Looks like they're plotting something, he said, leaning against the railing. Of course they are, I replied. Karen can't stand losing face. If she can't get the law on her side, she'll try intimidation. Sure enough, a few hours later, Karen appeared at our gate with a small crowd in tow. She had a clipboard in hand and a smug grin plastered across her face. Behind her stood Dalton and two other HOA members, Mrs. Green, who always looked like she smelled something foul, and a wiry man named Turner, who never spoke much but was known for slipping nasty letters into neighbors' mailboxes. I walked down to meet them, Luke trailing behind me with his arms crossed. "What's all this?" I asked, glancing at the crowd. Karen lifted her chin. "We're here to conduct an HOA inspection of the lake. We have reason to believe you're in violation of several community regulations, improper maintenance, unauthorized water use, and, of course, illegal fishing activities." I let out a short laugh. "Improper maintenance, lady. This lake has been here longer than your whole HOA. It doesn't fall under your jurisdiction, and you know it." Dalton stepped forward, holding a rolled-up paper. "We've reviewed the HOA charter, and it clearly states that any water feature within sight of the community must meet HOA standards. That means no fishing poles, no unapproved docks, and no unregistered boats." Luke raised an eyebrow. "Unregistered boats. The only boat on that lake is our old rowboat, and it's been tied to that dock since before I was born." Karen's grin widened like she'd just won a prize. "Exactly. That's why we're issuing an official warning. You have 7 days to remove the dock, stop all fishing activities, and allow an HOA-approved contractor to inspect the water quality. Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $200. I took a slow step closer, towering over her just enough to make her step back. "Let me make this clear. Karen, this isn't HOA land. This is Harper land. Your clipboard and made-up fines mean nothing here. If you or your contractor set foot on my property without permission, I'll have the sheriff charge you with trespassing." Karen's face flushed red, but she didn't back down. "You think you can bully me? I've dealt with men like you before. You can't just wave some dusty papers around and pretend you own the place. We're the HOA. We set the rules here." Luke's voice cut through the air, calm but sharp. "Actually, I set the rules on this lake. As Wildlife Warden Chief, I have the authority to regulate everything that happens here, including inspections. And, right now, you're interfering with official wildlife monitoring. If you keep this up, I can issue you a citation for harassment." Dalton's face turned pale. "Harassment? That's not what we're doing." "Then turn around," Luke said, his tone unflinching. "Because this is your first and only warning. The next time you try to interfere with this property, it'll go on record. And, believe me, the county takes that seriously." For a moment, no one spoke. Karen's hand tightened around her clipboard, her knuckles white. I could see the fury simmering in her eyes. She wasn't used to people standing up to her. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I'll bring this to the board. We'll vote to escalate this matter legally. You'll regret messing with me." I crossed my arms. "Go ahead. Just remember, the last person who tried to mess with this family ended up selling their house to get away from the mess they caused. Do you really want to test us?" Karen's lips pressed into a thin line as she turned on her heel. Dalton and the others followed, though none of them looked particularly eager. They all knew Karen had a knack for stirring trouble, but few were willing to go toe-to-toe with the law like she was. When they were gone, Luke exhaled slowly. "She's like a storm that won't pass." "Storms come and go," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "What matters is how you stand when they hit. We've got history, law, and truth on our side. Let her throw whatever she wants at us, we'll outlast her." As we walked back to the porch, I caught sight of Karen on her phone again, pacing like a caged animal. Something told me she was planning her next move, and this time, it wouldn't just be a warning. 2 days after Karen's so-called inspection, a letter arrived in the mail. It was thick, printed on fancy paper, and stamped with the HOA's logo in gold. I opened it at the kitchen table while Luke leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching my face carefully as I skimmed through the contents. I felt my jaw tighten. Well, would you look at this? They're threatening legal action now. Claims we're obstructing community standards and refusing to comply with HOA regulations. They want us to pay a $1,000 fine and remove the dock within 7 days. Luke snorted. $1,000 for our own dock? They're insane. Not insane, I replied, setting the letter down. Just desperate. Karen's losing control, and this is her way of pushing harder. But this, I tapped the paper with my finger. This won't hold up in court. We've got too much proof. I stood and walked to the old wooden desk by the window, where I kept our important documents. Pulling open the bottom drawer, I retrieved the manila folder that held everything from land deeds to environmental permits. As I laid them out on the table, Luke's eyes widened. "Dad, you've been keeping all of this ready." "Of course," I said. When you grow up on land like this, you learn early that people will always try to take what's not theirs. Your great-grandfather fought the railroad when they tried to reroute water from this lake. Your grandfather battled the county when they wanted to drain it for irrigation. And now, it's our turn to deal with an HOA and a woman who doesn't understand where the line is drawn. Luke nodded, determination setting in his features. Then we fight. I'm ready. That afternoon, we drove into town to visit the county records office. The building was an old red brick structure with tall windows and the smell of paper and dust lingering in the halls. Mrs. Delaney, the records clerk, looked up from her desk as we walked in. "Mr. Harper," she said with a warm smile. "I haven't seen you here in a while. What brings you in today?" "HOA trouble," I said simply, placing the threatening letter on her counter. "They're trying to claim our lake falls under their rules. I need certified copies of every deed and water rights document for the Harper property." Mrs. Delaney adjusted her glasses and skimmed the letter. "Oh, for heaven's sake. This again. I thought the last boundary dispute settled this." "It did," I replied, "but some folks don't like taking no for an answer." Within an hour, we walked out with a stack of certified documents that proved beyond any doubt that Harper Lake was private property, legally established and owned by my family since 1874. Luke tucked them carefully into a leather folder, his face lighting up with confidence. "Karen's not going to know what hit her," he said with a grin. "Don't get cocky," I warned. "She's the kind of person who'll double down even when she's wrong. That's when she's most dangerous." Sure enough, when we returned home, Karen's SUV was parked near our gate. She was standing there with Dalton and 2 other board members, holding cameras and taking photos of the dock. I pulled the truck into the driveway and stepped out, holding the folder in plain sight. "What do you think you're doing?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Karen turned, a smirk on her face. "Documenting violations. These photos will go to our attorney. By the time we're through, you'll be paying thousands in penalties." I walked right up to the gate, stopping just a few feet from her. "Karen, let me make this very clear." I opened the folder and pulled out one of the certified deeds. "This is proof that every inch of this lake and shoreline belongs to the Harper family. Your HOA has zero authority here. If you keep trespassing and harassing us, I'll have the sheriff issue a restraining order." Dalton took a step back, eyeing the official stamps on the papers. "Is that?" "We'll go to the county office and see for yourself," I said. "Mrs. Delaney will be happy to confirm it." Luke stepped up beside me, his wildlife warden badge gleaming in the sunlight. And, just so you know, interfering with a state wildlife officer's duties is a crime. You're on thin ice, Karen. Karen's smirk faltered for a split second, but she quickly straightened. This isn't over. We'll see you in court if we have to. Good, I replied. Court is where the truth wins. The group left in silence, Karen muttering under her breath as Dalton avoided eye contact. When they were gone, Luke looked at me and said, "We just drew the line in the sand, didn't we?" I smiled. No, son. We just reminded them that the line's been there all along. That evening, we sat on the porch watching the sunset over the lake. The water turned gold and red as the day faded, and for a moment, all the tension melted away. I knew the fight wasn't over. Karen would try something else, something bigger. But with Luke by my side, I felt ready for whatever came next. 2 days later, a formal notice was slipped into our mailbox, sealed with the HOA emblem and signed by Dalton himself. It was an invitation, or rather a summons, to attend an emergency HOA meeting that Saturday afternoon. The bold letters said, "Failure to appear will result in legal escalation." Luke held the paper between his fingers, reading it aloud with a wry grin. Sounds like they're holding court without a judge. I smirked. That's exactly what it is. Karen probably thinks this is her big chance to humiliate us in front of the board. Well, Luke said, tapping the paper on the table, let's not give them what they want. Let's bring everything: the deeds, the documents, even your grandfather's letters. We'll crush them with the truth. By Saturday, the community center parking lot was already crowded. Pickup trucks and shiny sedans lined the dusty gravel. As we walked inside, folder in hand, I could feel the stares. Karen stood near the front with Dalton and the other board members, her arms folded like she'd already won. "Ah, the Harpers," she said loudly, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Glad you could join us. We need to resolve this situation before it gets out of hand." I set the folder on the table at the front of the room and looked around. A dozen HOA members were sitting in folding chairs, waiting like spectators at a boxing match. Luke stood beside me, silent but steady, his badge clipped visibly to his belt. Dalton cleared his throat. "Let's get this started. We've had several complaints about unauthorized fishing, an unapproved dock, and violations of HOA aesthetics concerning the Harper Lake." I raised a hand. First off, it's not the Harper Lake. It's Harper Lake because we own it. It's private property, recognized by county and state law. Your HOA rules stop where our property line begins. Karen shot me a glare. Oh, please. That so-called deed you keep waving around is ancient. Things have changed. This lake affects property values for every home in this community. We have the right to oversee its use. Luke stepped forward, his voice firm but measured. "Ma'am, I don't just have a fishing rod out there for fun. As the wildlife warden chief, I oversee fish stocking, water health, and wildlife protection in this entire valley. I have the legal authority to manage this lake. If you or anyone here tries to interfere, you're breaking the law, not the other way around." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some neighbors who had been sitting quietly now glanced at each other, clearly taken aback. I opened the folder and laid out the certified documents, each one stamped and signed by the county clerk. "This," I said, tamping the top page, "is the original deed from 1874, when my great-grandfather Samuel Harper built the dam that created this lake. These are water rights documents, recorded and verified every decade since. And this," I held up a more recent paper, "is a letter from the County Wildlife Department acknowledging Luke's authority over this property as part of his official duties." Dalton leaned forward to study the stamps. His face paled. "These are official." "Of course they're official," I said. "Did you think we were making this up?" Karen's lips tightened into a thin line. "You can wave your papers all you want. The HOA board can still vote to restrict any activities that harm property values. And fishing poles and that ugly old dock certainly don't help." Luke chuckled softly. "Ugly old dock. That dock's been here longer than this entire neighborhood. It's a historic landmark, if anything. But if you think it's ugly, feel free to avert your eyes." The room erupted with laughter. Even a few of the board members couldn't hide their grins. Karen's face turned crimson, but before she could fire back, Dalton raised his hands. "Karen, enough," he said quietly. "These documents leave no room for debate. The Harper's land is not HOA property. We can't enforce regulations where we have no jurisdiction." What Karen snapped, "You're just going to let them do whatever they want." "Yes," Dalton said with a sigh, "because they're not under our authority. We'll be wasting time and money if we push this any further." The silence that followed was golden. Karen looked around, expecting support, but the crowd avoided her gaze. One by one, the board members nodded in agreement with Dalton. Luke turned to me with a small smile. "Sounds like we're done here." Karen, furious and humiliated, grabbed her purse. "This isn't the end," she muttered, storming toward the door. "You'll regret crossing me." Maybe. I called after her, but I doubt it. As we left the community center, the tension that had hung over us all week seemed to lift. Luke looked relieved but still cautious. "She's not going to give up that easily, Dad. I can feel it." "You're right," I said. "But for now, we've stood our ground, and next time she tries something, we'll be ready." The days following the showdown meeting were oddly quiet. Karen's SUV was parked in her driveway, but she wasn't prowling the street like usual. Luke and I both knew that kind of silence wasn't peace. It was the calm before another storm. On Thursday morning, just as the fog was lifting off the lake, a white envelope appeared in our mailbox. I opened it to find a notice from the sheriff's office. Karen had filed a complaint accusing us of violating community safety standards and obstructing HOA authority. I shook my head with a laugh. Luke was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee. "She filed something, didn't she?" he asked, reading my expression. "Yep. She went straight to the sheriff this time, but she's about to learn a hard lesson." I called Sheriff Reynolds, who had been a close friend of the family for years. He answered on the first ring. "Morning. Harper. I figured I'd be hearing from you," he said with a chuckle. "We got Karen's complaint, but don't worry, we're not taking it seriously. I know who owns that lake, and I know your boy is wildlife warden chief now. That's what I figured," I said. "But I'm done playing nice. She needs to face real consequences." Sheriff Reynolds agreed. "If she keeps filing false complaints, I can fine her for misuse of emergency services and harassment. Want me to pay her a visit? Absolutely," I said with a grin. "Let her know the law is watching her, not the other way around." By that afternoon, Karen's voice could be heard across the street as Reynolds knocked on her door. Luke and I watched from the porch, coffee mugs in hand. The sheriff's voice was calm but firm, and though we couldn't hear every word, Karen's defensive gestures spoke volumes. "She's getting a warning," Luke said, unable to hide his satisfaction. "More than that," I replied. "Reynolds doesn't play around when someone wastes county resources. If she calls again without cause, she'll be paying fines instead of handing them out." Later that day, a few neighbors stopped by. Surprisingly, not everyone was on Karen's side. Mrs. Henderson, an older woman who'd lived here longer than most, came to shake my hand. "I'm glad you stood up to her," she said. "Karen's been trying to boss everyone around since she moved in. Maybe now she'll think twice." Another neighbor, Mr. Green, admitted he'd been pressured into signing some of Karen's complaints just to keep the peace. "She bullies folks," he said, his voice low. "But seeing you fight back, well, it's good to know someone's not scared of her." Luke smiled at that. "We're not scared of her. We just don't like people pretending they own what's ours." The next morning, a letter arrived from the county wildlife department addressed to Luke. It officially recognized Harper Lake as a protected monitoring site under his supervision. That meant no one, not even the HOA, could interfere with his work without risking legal action. Luke held the letter like a badge of honor. "Think this will shut her up?" he asked. "Maybe," I said. "But if not, we'll make it loud and clear. This is our home. No HOA is taking that from us." Sure enough, by Friday evening, word had spread. Karen was nowhere to be seen, and the HOA board had gone quiet. Even Dalton hadn't called. The legal weight of Luke's position, combined with the sheriff's warning, had forced them to back off for now. That night, we sat out by the dock. The air was cool, the sky streaked with stars. Luke cast his fishing line into the lake, the soft ripple of the water the only sound for a long moment. "You know," he said finally, "this week made me realize how much this place means to me. I used to think it was just a lake and some trees, but now it feels like a part of who we are. I don't ever want to lose it." I smiled, watching the moonlight shimmer on the water. "That's exactly why we fight for it. Your great-grandfather built this with his own hands. Your grandfather kept it alive. Now it's your turn. You're not just a warden chief. You're a Harper. And that means something." Luke nodded, his jaw set with quiet pride. "Then I'll protect it, no matter what." As the night deepened, I couldn't help but feel that justice had been served not because Karen had been silenced, but because we had proven that truth and determination always win against lies and arrogance. The weekend came, and for the first time in weeks, the valley felt still and calm. No HOA cars lurked near our driveway. No clipped, angry messages were slipped into our mailbox. Karen's house looked oddly quiet, curtains drawn, and her once constant chatter on the Neighborhood Watch app had gone silent. Luke and I stood on the dock that Saturday morning, watching the sunlight spill over Harper Lake. The water shimmered like molten gold, and the breeze carried the sound of birdsong across the valley. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past days finally ease off my shoulders. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Luke said, glancing at me. "Yeah," I replied, nodding slowly. "This is how it's supposed to be: quiet, steady. Our family built this place for peace, not for drama." Luke tossed a pebble into the lake, sending ripples across the mirrored surface. I think she finally got the message. Between the sheriff, the county papers, and that wildlife letter, Karen's got no ground left to stand on. I chuckled. Maybe. But even if she tries again, she's learned we don't back down. Later that day, we invited a few neighbors over, folks who had quietly supported us during the ordeal. Mrs. Henderson brought a basket of fresh-baked cornbread, and Mr. Green came by with smoked brisket from his own smoker. We gathered under the big oak tree near the lake, eating, laughing, and talking about how Karen's reign had finally crumbled. She's been bossing people around since the day she moved in. "Mrs. Henderson said, shaking her head. "But she picked the wrong family to mess with. You two gave her a taste of her own medicine." Luke smiled, though his tone was humble. "We just wanted to be left alone. This lake is part of our life. It's not something we're willing to give up for anyone's handbook." That night, after everyone had gone home, Luke and I stayed on the porch long after the stars appeared. The moon was high, casting silver reflections on the water. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about all the battles my family had fought over this land. "You know," I said softly, "your great-grandfather Samuel used to sit on this same porch, watching the moon over the lake. He once told your grandfather, 'If you love something enough to fight for it, you'll never lose it, even if the world tries to take it away.'" Luke turned toward me, his expression thoughtful. "I get that now. I used to think this was just a story, just land. But it's more than that. It's part of who I am." I gave him a proud smile. "That's what I wanted you to see. Being a Harper isn't just about owning land. It's about knowing why it matters and standing your ground when someone tries to take it." We sat there in silence for a while, listening to the crickets and the gentle lap of water against the dock. There was something healing about that quiet, something no HOA rule or Karen's temper could ever touch. By the following Monday, word had spread through the community. Neighbors who had once avoided us now nodded in respect as they drove by. Dalton even stopped at the gate one morning to offer a half-hearted apology, mumbling something about misunderstandings and moving forward. Karen, however, never showed her face. Rumor had it she'd been slapped with a fine from the sheriff's office for filing false complaints. Whether it was true or not, the fire in her eyes had dimmed. Luke and I spent that day working on small repairs around the property. He patched up the dock while I tightened the hinges on the barn door. At one point, I looked at him, sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow, and I saw not just my son, but the man he was becoming. A man who understood the value of hard work, heritage, and standing tall in the face of unfairness. That evening, we had one last quiet moment by the lake. Luke set down his tools and picked up his fishing rod, casting a line into the water as the sky turned shades of pink and orange. "Dad," he said, without taking his eyes off the rippling surface, "I want to make this lake better, stock more fish, build better habitats, not just for us, but for the wildlife." It's what Grandpa would have done. I felt a swell of pride. Then do it. This is your legacy now as much as mine. And if anyone tries to stop you, they'll have to go through me first. As night fell, I realized something important. The fight with Karen hadn't just been about keeping our property. It had been about remembering who we are. It had been about teaching my son that some things are worth every ounce of strength to protect. When the first stars appeared, I stood, clapped him on the shoulder, and said, "Come on, Luke. Let's head inside. We've got a future to build." And for the first time in weeks, I felt truly at peace. Every corner of this country holds stories like ours. Stories of ordinary people standing their ground against those who think power comes from rules and titles. Here by Harper Lake, we prove that family, history, and truth are stronger than any HOA handbook or loud voice. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of your own battles for home, family, or peace, then join us. Subscribe to our channel and stay with us for more stories where justice wins and where the quiet strength of everyday folks shines through. Share this video with someone who needs to know they're not alone in their fight. Together, we can keep these stories alive and inspire others to stand tall.